Greetings everyone, I'm Mar, and once again this is my opinion. Like most children of the 80s and 90s, I loved Star Wars growing up. I played with the toys, spam watched the films, and craved. While my fanboyism has toned down in recent years, my love for the franchise hasn't wavered. Toys have been replaced with novels, and spectacle with storytelling. This is partially why I was excited when Episode 7 was announced in the wake of Disney's buyout. This excitement grew with the teaser trailers, nostalgia welling inside as Harrison Ford spoke those famous words.
Chewie, we're home.
I saw the film opening night, and I loved it. Abrams had delivered on his promises. Now that years have passed and the initial hype has subsided, how does the film hold up? Overall, I still enjoy the film, but my critical eye picks out the flaws easier. Aesthetically, it's closer to the original trilogy than the prequels were. While Lucas did use practical effects on those films, the post-production rendering made some hard to spot amidst 90s into 2000s CGI. Think of it like the color blindness test. Where does green end and yellow begin? Special effects have improved greatly in the decade following Revenge of the Sith, allowing the two to blend exquisitely. The CG models are even given a practical tint, and the puppet suit work makes me explode with joy. Story is where the flaws are noticeable, although there's only one that leaves me shaking my head. Many have called Force Awakens a remake of A New Hope. While I understand the sentiment, I respectfully disagree. There are similarities, and both films share similar beats, but the main Star Wars films have always been cyclical, recurring elements drawn from the hero's journey archetype popping up over and over. To use a musical analogy, think of the series like a symphony. There's a handful of recurring notes, with new ones sprinkled in between. I know George Lucas wasn't a fan, but what was it he said himself? It's like poetry, it rhymes. To me, complaining about Jakku or the Cantina are nitpicks. The droid MacGuffin I concede, but it's not a bad way to store information. Who's to say Leia is the first person to execute that idea? As for arguments regarding selling toys, that's been a part of Star Wars since day one. Lucas retaining the merchandising rights is what began the modern trend. While it has a mild point with BB-8, I'd list it under nitpick. Batman and Robin levels, it is not. Starkiller Base, yeah, they got a point there. While an interesting conceptual idea, while I would have preferred something akin to the Sun Crusher, a weapon that stores and unleashes solar power is cool. Did we really need another Death Star, though? It was asinine already that Palpatine built a second one in Return of the Jedi, even though it did fall in line with his character's overconfidence, but a third is ludicrous. We've entered Spaceballs territory now. Being powered by stealing energy from the sun is an interesting idea, but the science and speed involved pushes things further into the fantastical. Silly to say in a series about laser sword wielding wizards, but valid. That said, if the base is a necessity, why push it out this early? Starkiller should be an endgame problem. At least Lucas having two Death Stars has a real world reason behind it. It was meant to be endgame, but he pushed it sooner in case Star Wars was a one-off. While not mentioned on screen, I do like that the base was constructed on the ice world of Ilum, where many Jedi retrieved their Kyber crystals for lightsaber construction. Kyber was a part of the Death Star's construction, so it's fitting that an even larger one is built out of the motherlode. Another common criticism is that Rey is a Rey Sue. For those not in the know, a Rey Sue is an idealized, seemingly perfect character, often the result of author insertion. This part is common in fanfiction, although sometimes, such as Dante's Inferno, it has literary merit. Sues can perform tasks better than others, usually above what their training or expertise should allow. What does Rey do that garners this label? She's a great pilot, and picks aspects of the Force up quickly, allowing her to best Kylo Ren during their climactic lightsaber duel. While Rey does straddle the line, both in this film and its sequels, I wouldn't 100% label her a Sue. While on the surface an argument could be made, when one examines things deeper and takes moments into the proper context, things are sensible. Rey grew up on a scavenger planet, and she's around junk starfighters all day. She was also on Carplant's ward. Film never fully states this, but the flashback infers, and he had possession of the Millennium Falcon. While Rey does state it hasn't flown in years, that doesn't mean she hasn't seen it fly or handled similar controls herself. She did know the specifics of Plant's additions, so it's not a far stretch. There's also the possibility of flight simulators and bumming lessons from outsiders, but that's a large what if. As for the Force, each moment is sensible for its own reason. Although untrained, Rey's raw potential is immense, and like her predecessors Anakin and Luke, she likely used the Force subconsciously her entire life. This changed when she touched the lightsaber, and the Kyber crystal called, giving Rey her first step into a larger world. Given her potential, it's not far-fetched that Rey could turn Kylo's mental probe back on him, especially since he approached the action nonchalantly with his conflicted mind. While convenient that she managed to find the one attack spot, it's why you don't mind crush someone without leaving your own guarded. To Kylo's credit, he didn't know that she was Force sensitive. While we learned some of Kylo's history since 2015, at the time, for all we knew, this is the first time he's attempted to probe a fellow Force sensitive, and he has the unfortunate luck to come across one with immense potential. I will concede that she does pick up the mind trick and Force grip rather quickly. That said, the progression still feels plausible. By that point, Rey knows she can manipulate the Force, from a combination of Kylo's probe and the Kyber crystal's call. It's only natural that she'd stretch out and test her capabilities, with raw power balancing out finesse and training. Her persuasion attempts take several passes to yield success, and Rey is surprised when she calls the lightsaber to her hand. The moment I partially concede is Rey overpowering a trained Force user in direct combat. However, there are precedents for this in Legends. Darth Zana comes to mind. In Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, Zana ragdolled two experienced knights simply with her rage. While the knights' level of power isn't specified and it's likely they were low-level Jedi jobbers, Zana pulling this off with minimal training is still impressive. This precedent factored in with Kylo's wound and mindset, along with some bias from the Kyber crystal, and it's plausible for Rey to pull the saber. Before the follow-ups, there was also the possibility of this being things remembered over things learned. While I haven't brought it up yet, in the novelization, Kylo follows this moment up by saying, "It is you." Perhaps Kylo originally was going to be involved in Rey's past and why she was on Jakku. A student that was hidden and had blocked out memories, probably. Oh, the what-ifs there. Kylo had two major disadvantages going into the duel: his conflicted mind, worsened by patricide, and his abdominal wound. While Kylo could draw strength from his pain like other Darksiders, his mind would prevent this ability from working properly, especially if his training were incomplete. While Kylo's past has been explored somewhat in the comics, it's hard to gauge his power level compared to his uncle and grandfather. To lowball, I'd say he's between Padawan Anakin and Knight Anakin. He's trained decently, but still has much to learn, getting by on raw potential instead of finesse. Even so, this potential allowed him to disarm Finn after toying with him and dominate Rey. That's right, Kylo dominated a majority of his duel with Rey, his strength forcing the initiate to give ground until a saber lock. It was only when she gave into the Force, inadvertently tapping into Force augmentation, that Rey turned the momentum and Kylo's wound became his Achilles. If Kylo hadn't been injured, I have no doubt he would have eventually disarmed Rey, similar to how Vader disarmed Luke once training was over. Power alone can only get one so far. As for how the duels are choreographed, I like them. While the prequel duels are the highlight of those films, there are many moments that come across as unnecessary fluff, stage choreography at its finest. Here, the duel is staged in a manner akin to Empire and Jedi. Most motion isn't wasted and strikes make strategic sense. It also has the advantage of advances in film techniques, making it an amalgamation of both trilogy styles. I know some complain that the duel is boring, but given the combatants, it made sense. These aren't fully trained Jedi and Sith hacking at each other, these are, for lack of a more appropriate phrase, novices. Rey and Finn have clumsy moments, but that's how someone who's never handled a lightsaber before should wield one. Kylo feels experienced, with his style modified to compensate for his unique weapon design. Rey isn't perfect. While she does pick up on the Force quickly, she has one fatal character flaw. She refuses to accept her family isn't returning for her. Because of this, she lingers on Jakku for years, with nothing but herself and hope. Her need to linger is so great, Rey doesn't wish to leave for 5 minutes. It takes outside forces to pry her away. Despite this, she's willing to help people she barely knows because it's the right thing to do. Some might thrust this under Sue, but the willingness to help others doesn't assume make. By that logic, dozens of other characters and some real-world people are Sues. Besides, this willingness could be exploited, as the following film shows. Family issues aside, Rey doesn't have much else that makes her an engaging protagonist. She's rather basic. Luke was the same in episode 4, but Mark's acting balanced things out. Daisy accomplishes the same thing here. If an actress of lesser talent had been cast, we might be in a prequel situation, with fans lambasting both the writing and its execution. While I did enjoy the sequel, this issue remains, sadly. The following films hamper it slightly, but not to the point for me to fully label Rey a Sue. While I mainly wish to keep this discussion to episode 7, The Last Jedi brings up an interesting point that can be applied here. As Kylo puts it, Rey looks for father figures to fill the void in her heart, jumping from Han to Luke. It's safe to say she has a parental complex of some sort. Given what we learn in Rise of Skywalker, I think we can all understand why. Who would want to be related to the Senate? As I've mentioned several times, Kylo Ren is a conflicted character. He views himself as Darth Vader's true heir, but like his grandfather before him, he's sentimental. While the movie cut this part out, the novelization made it clear that Kylo knows about his grandfather's redemption, but views it as a moment of weakness. He claims not to have the same weakness, but he's burying it inside. Therefore, Snoke demands that he kill Han Solo, to kill this part of him. Vader thought he had killed his wife, and buried the guilt with anger. To avoid making the same mistake, Kylo must kill his father. He succeeds, but the action further unbalances him. Combined with his injury, this leads to his undoing. Some might call foul at this, but there is a precedent within the films. Anakin's duel with Obi-Wan. Anakin was unbalanced the entire fight, caused by Padme's supposed betrayal. This unbalance combined with his freshly turned overconfidence is what led to his defeat, and his incarceration in the iconic suit. It's also responsible for one of the duel's most memorable exchanges, the Force Push Impasse. Anakin's potential is far greater than Obi-Wan, yet his old master matched him. How could this be so? While Obi-Wan's dedication and finesse played a part, it alone wouldn't be enough to overcome the Chosen One's raw might. Even with all his strength, a lack of mental balance prevented Anakin from overpowering his old friend. What was it that we mentioned that Lucas said before? It's like poetry, it rhymes. Finn and Poe most viewers seem to be happy with. Finn's desertion of the First Order feels natural, especially after what he witnessed during the opening scene. His desire to flee to the unknown regions can be viewed as cowardly, but given his first-hand knowledge of the First Order, it's understandable. With my most recent viewing, I'd say he has some PTSD. Finn makes up for it later anyway. He had several awkward moments, but they made sense within the context of their scenes. He's also responsible for one of Han's best lines in the movie.
Figure it out. We'll use the Force. That's not how the Force works. Oh, really? You're cold?
His lightsaber fight with Kylo can be considered wish fulfillment audience insertion, as everyone who's watched the Star Wars film has wanted to wield the elegant weapon for a more civilized age in combat. Finn also never wins with the weapon, losing to both the trooper, and Kylo. Finn's strikes are also clumsy, which is logical for an untrained user. Poe is an ace pilot in the spirit of Han and Wedge. The two have a good rapport, but it is a head-scratcher how he managed to escape from Jakku. The film explains it offhand when the pair reunite, but it's vague. One area where the novelization is way better. Now we come to Han Solo's demise. I understand the anger, and it's not misguided. No one enjoys seeing their favorite characters die. Lord knows there's plenty of Red Wedding reaction videos to prove this point. However, just because we love the character doesn't mean they should be exempt from death. As much as I love many of the legend stories, it became predictable over time, especially when Lucas's "no main trilogy characters die" edict was factored in. No possibility of death neuters consequences and drama. While Dragon Ball has a place in my heart, it's why the later sagas don't have the same oomph. Chewie did eventually get a meaningful death in Legends, but he was the only one. Granted, he went out like a boss trying to hold up a moon. Disney's buyout killed the edict, and with Harrison Ford on board, it was only a matter of time before Solo died. We all know Ford wanted him to die in the original trilogy. Ford got his wish, and Han received a meaningful death, one that impacted the denouement and aspects of the sequels. A divisive, dramatic choice, but it's one I find myself siding with. While not at the same level as the original trilogy, The Force Awakens was a step in the right direction. The acting and direction are great, the special effects are eye-pleasing, and Williams delivers another epic score, although that's one element I will admit the prequels execute better as a whole. It laid a foundation to build on. Sadly, the rest of the building wasn't constructed properly, but that's a tale for another hyperspace jump.